Hello everyone, my name is Imani Mitchell and the title of my presentation is Examining Adverse Childhood Experiences Among Black and Hispanic Children. For a quick overview, the term ACEs refers to any abuse or potentially traumatic event that happened to a person under the age of 18. Statistics show that ACEs are very common, with at least 45% of individuals experiencing one ACE in their lifetime. And for minority children, we see that the rates of ACE exposure are higher, with 61% of African American children experiencing an ACE in their lifetime and 51% of Hispanic children. There are three overarching research objectives for the current study, the first being how prevalent are different ACEs in Black and Hispanic minority children, the second being how are different ACEs related to the mental health, notably depression, of minority children, and the last one being, do factors of resilience buffer or minimize the impacts of ACEs on Black and Hispanic children's mental health? The data for the current study came from the Early Childhood Longitudinal Study, and this was the kindergarten cohort that followed the same children from kindergarten all the way to 5th grade. For the current study, I used a subset of Black and Hispanic children and compared them to the reference category, and for the study, that was white children. I also utilized both the second and ninth wave of data. The dependent variable for the current study was depressive symptoms. The independent variable, therefore, was ACEs and resilience. In order to measure depressive symptoms, I created an 8-item child depression scale that consisted of questions such as, I worry others don't like me, I feel lonely at school, or others tease me at school. In order to measure ACEs, we measured food insecurity, poverty, physical and emotional abuse. And to measure resiliency, I created a 6-item child resiliency scale. And both summary statistics and regression analysis were used for the current study. On this slide, you'll see a copy of the summary statistics table, and as you can see, the table is broken down into 3 panels. Panel A showing child outcomes at ages 10 and 11, and that was taken from the 9th wave of data. Panel B showing child economic hardship and ACEs at ages 5 to 6, and this was taken from the 2nd wave of data. And Panel C showing child controls at ages 5 and 6, also taken from the 2nd wave of data. So on this slide, you will see our regression analysis output. You see that there is Model 1, Model 2, and Model 3. And as we go across the models, we continuously control for more variables. And on the next slide, we will get into the results and key findings. So our results and key findings are separated by the results of the summary statistics and results of the regression analysis. So for our summary statistics in Panel A, we saw that Black children have higher levels of depression than white children, and we also saw that Hispanic children show the lowest levels of depression and resilience in the sample. In Panel B, we saw that Black and Hispanic children experience more ACEs and economic hardship than white children in the sample. And in Panel C, we saw that Hispanic and Black parents have lower levels of education and are less likely to be married than white parents. For regression analysis in Model 1, we saw again that Black children have higher levels of depression than white children, and that Hispanic children had the lowest levels of depression, and this is due to something called the immigrant paradox. In Model 2, we saw that poverty, food insecurity, and any type of abuse, being emotional or physical, were positively related to depression in these children. And in Model 3, we saw that resilience appeared to decrease or mitigate the risk for depressive symptoms in our sample. So of course, no study is without limitations or potential confounding variables, and I wanted to take the time to just mention 4 here. The first being COVID-19. COVID just put a time constraint on this project when it started back in 2020 and when things were moving from in-person to remote or online. The second is Blacks belonging to a marginalized group. We as scholars note that there are other factors such as discrimination, stigmatization, even a neighborhood that a child lives in that can affect the mental health of that individual. So for the current study, that could explain why we saw higher levels of depression in Black children. The next factor is the immigrant paradox, and the final factor is lower mental health stigma in the white community. That could explain why we saw low levels of depression in our white sample, because they may be afforded more access to mental health services than Black and Hispanic children. So, in conclusion, the results of the study showed that Blacks and Hispanics do experience more ACEs, specifically poverty, food insecurity, and physical and emotional abuse at higher levels than white children. Early intervention is necessary in order to prevent the negative outcomes produced by ACEs, and I also wanted to mention the power of social support. Even though the study did not consider any protective factors, I did want to mention that both Black and Hispanic children often do have a very broad and vast social network that can help to buffer and protect them from the negative effects of ACEs.